All right, and discussion to truth coming in at a well, it's 3:30 actually, standard Eastern Standard, and I'm doing a special broadcast just because I feel it's important and necessary. America Under Siege. I started this show in Wynwood, that's District of Miami, using Wynwood Radio as my bunker, and I did so really out of invitation. Someone I identify as Kitty, who was associated to the online station and studio in Wynwood, invited me onto the program due to the research that I had done regarding the Zika virus in Miami, and the pesticide being used as a means to destroy the virus in the local area. And you know what, folks? I turned a blind eye, if you will, or deaf ear, whichever one you like, to the controversy, and just basically went about my day best I could and know, and it was my late friend, a fellow that I'll simply identify as David. I have made a tribute to him in the past. That got me involved. He happened to be somebody that I trusted a lot, and he got me involved in looking into the local debate. And as I went to the town hall meeting, I was appalled, really, at how the mayor and the council members really shut down any of the local cry from the citizens, demanding a safer alternative, that the pesticide was simply too harsh to be using. And as it turns out, from what I've been told by Dr. Hall, who has a lawsuit against Dr. Fauci, what I was told is that there were actually no cases of Zika even found. So wasteful use of the pesticide known as known to be out of studies out of Sweden, a neurotoxin, and rejected a World Health Organization shipment that was delivered to Puerto Rico, was rejected by Ricky Rosselló. And at one point, I had made contact with the office of Rosselló, and there was a somewhat preliminary agreement to do a one-on-one interview in San Juan. And I had a hotel owner that was willing to host the event, but that didn't happen. And here we are now, 4 years later, just coming up on 4 years later, and appalled, really, to see that there is another virus making its rounds globally, or having made its rounds globally. And of course, Zika was isolated to the Miami area. and I think there was supposedly a case in San Diego. But now, a what was of a virus epidemic portions is now a virus, a different virus, but there's definitely got to be similarities. Now a pandemic globally. So look, I simply was invited. The Rockefeller Association with Zika, the patent on that extraction process is owned by the Rockefeller Foundation. It's distributed through ATCC, I believe, out of England. And what was really appalling to me was the pesticide also having ties to the Rockefeller Foundation by means of Chevron Chemical Corporation, and this being known as various trade names, but dibrom and nalid interchangeable for this product. And look, I believe in free enterprise, free economy, free competition. I have no problem with the Rockefeller family or foundation. Well, I'll hold my breath on that. But what I have no problem with is wealth. Hey, if you make wealth honestly, then that's great. I do have a problem with criminal wealth, and obviously, Standard Oil was deemed by Congress in 1912 to be a criminal in their organization, so it was dissolved. But what most Americans don't realize is that it was, I think, dissolved into about 32 different companies, yet from my understanding, the Rockefeller Foundation remained the largest shareholders of those smaller companies. So even though Standard Oil by name broke into smaller companies, the managing ownership retained the majority share of each of those smaller companies. So the monopoly, if you will, went nowhere. It only became stronger and more powerful, and certainly over the course of the decades to follow after 1912. And what's also interesting is that 1913 is when the Federal Reserve Bank was formally created in the United States. And if you're listening to this as an American, and really as any citizen, regardless of what country you're living in, you have to ask yourself, do you have a banking system that represents the best interest of the people? This is an argument that's no different from the days of the Articles of Confederation, the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, George Washington. These are the same type of banking arguments that these people had, and nothing has changed. Yet Americans don't gravitate to that argument. Let me give you a timeline. So you've got the Federal Reserve in 1913. You've got the Great Depression breaking. Well, you got World War I breaking out. Then a few years later, then you've got the Great Depression of the 1920s. Then you've got the federal Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt confiscating public gold and limiting that possession to a small number of ounces. Then you've got so keep your eye again on the banking mechanism that's running the U.S. government. I mean, we can even backtrack before 1913 and go to Abraham Lincoln, where he was also arguing over the banking system implemented during his time, and we know that he lost his life in Ford Theater. I've been fortunate, and I've been to that exact location in Ford Theater in D.C. But let's fast forward again, FDR, and move up into 1963. Then and we've got JFK. driving in a convertible uh, uh, down Elm Street, was it? Dealey Plaza in Dallas, and he gets his head blown off. And what he had done in July, that was November, what he had done in July was he had inserted U.S.-backed, Treasury-backed currency in, I believe they called silver certificates, interchangeable. I believe also Abraham Lincoln had issued silver certificates. I may be incorrect in that. And then within 10 years, you've got Richard Nixon with the gold shock. So 1971, I believe it is, Richard Nixon doing away with the gold standard. I don't know economics well enough to understand the justification as to why the American people, A, had their gold confiscated under FDR, and then B, why Nixon abolished the gold standard, right? And that's what happened. And so since 71, then you can look at a former JFK economic advisor, Dr. Peter Beter, Beter. And Dr. Peter Beter basically was arguing in the early 70s that Fort Knox had no gold, that it had really been hijacked, that the U.S. government had zero gold, and I believe he implied that it had been shipped to Switzerland. It was being contained by the IMF in Basel. You have to look into Peter Beter a little bit more and what he was arguing. So if you now fast forward today, and you consider that perhaps a central banking mechanism is what has grown various economies in Europe throughout time. You take France, you take Germany, you take these elements, these countries that were developed as a result of the fall of the Roman Empire historically. What happened to the Roman Empire? Well, they devalued their currency. The denarius, I believe, is the name of it. In the early days of the empire, it represented gold to a high degree. It actually had a high percentage of gold in the coin itself that was being traded on streets and businesses. And over the course of the demise of that empire, the percentage of gold became nil. You then have to ask yourself: is that somehow also reflected in the fact that the empire fell apart? You're looking at a very similar thing with the United States today. However, the argument is: did the U.S. dollar ever really have any value to it? The Federal Reserve note, certainly not. And so now you're inserting a global pandemic into the situation. So let me now get into a few moments of Catherine Austin Fitts. Catherine Austin Fitts is a Wharton grad, a Yale grad, and a former HUD advisor to the White House, I believe. She has managed billions of dollars over the course of her career, and she puts in 2020. You're now putting into perspective the impact of the Covid19 viral outbreak, a coronavirus. There are multiple coronaviruses. I think Zika is actually a coronavirus. And what was alarming to me, again, during the Zika outbreak, supposed outbreak, was that Zika and the pesticide acted the same way in the cranium of a human being, yet one would break the blood-brain barrier, that being the pesticide, and the other wouldn't. And I was alarmed at writing to the New England Journal of Medicine. I was alarmed when writing to Lancet out of the UK, Lancet Medical Journal, that there were no direct studies, peer-reviewed, that showed that Zika itself broke the blood-brain barrier and caused microcephaly in these children that were developing in fetus. Yet there was a direct link, and as I mentioned, this is Sweden, Oslo. that the pesticide does indeed break the blood-brain barrier and does cause microcephaly. Various things can cause microcephaly in a developing child, but that was again the argument with the Zika versus. So does COVID-19? I don't know. Does it break the blood-brain barrier? The vaccine, I would assume, that's being developed would. So again, what are the implications of the vaccine trial, or the trials happening now, or injection of vaccine into a human being? This is a global issue. So again, pulling back and saying, hey, what are the economics behind, or the impacts behind this pandemic? Catherine Austin Fitts, ladies and gentlemen, listen to what she has to say for a few moments. And you can find her interview on YouTube. USA Watchdog is this particular one that I'll be streaming from. We are watching the mother of all debt entrapments is the title. Okay, Catherine Austin Fitts.
Greater support by and large.
Back up here. I'm going to back up to about the 7-minute mark. Let me get this Wi-Fi running here. Bear with me, if you will. Again, this is Ian Trottier. Okay. This is Ian Trottier for Discussions of Truth. And I'm here every Wednesday. I'll refresh this for you.
Dependent economy globally. So small business, small farms shut down across the board, throwing both the emerging markets and many small business into debt traps. So we are watching the mother of all debt entrapments going on globally, and that means we're in for very radical reengineering. And of course, that's what we're seeing in the US. I mean, it's very interesting. If you come into Tulare, we have a tracker where we're tracking the COVID deaths by state and party affiliations of the governors and mayors. And one of the things you can see, you have 37 Fed locations of banks and branches across the country. Guess how many of them had violent protests?
None. I mean,
No.
none.
That's
33.
Watchdog talking now.
Wait. Say that again.
He's
33.
clueless.
If
He's
you
clueless.
map out all the cities that have a Fed bank, a Fed branch, or the headquarters for the Fed Board of Governors, you have 37 locations. You have 12 banks, you have 24 branches, and one board headquarters. 33 of those locations had violent protests.
You think the Fed is behind this?
Okay, so USA Watchdog is completely and totally clueless, and that's kind of my argument here, in that Americans really walk blind to the manipulation, the monopolization of the U.S. Federal Reserve banking system over their economy. While movements like Black Lives Matters waste people's time, I'm not saying that racial equality is not important. It certainly is. And should this incident with George Floyd have really been a racially motivated incident, which I question, because that officer and George had a relationship prior to that. They actually worked together. So I'm not sold that that was a racial incident. What I will tell you, for instance, Rodney King. What was that, in the 90s in L.A.? That was apparently a systematic racial incident. Okay? But have Americans overreacted? Absolutely. Do we all need to be striving for racial equality? Yes, we do. We've got Clarence Thomas sitting on the Supreme Court. We got a black person sitting on the Supreme Court, whereas I think there's a Latina, right? There's no Asian, right? So we have a long way to go in the United States. And it's not just with black people. I mean, the Chinese were slaves as well, in a sense, right? Weren't they? Correct me if I'm wrong. They were imported to build the railroads. My family history, I don't come from any slave owners. We've never owned slaves, to the best of my knowledge, directly. So I'm all for racial equality, don't get me wrong. Where I draw the line is when there's violence involved, when there's destruction of monuments illegally, when that sort of thing has not gone to vote and placed in the law. This is where I have a problem. I have a problem with the looting of innocent businesses. I have the problem with rioting. This has gone way too far across the country and the world. It looks like, however, in the United States, we have problems with this reoccurring. Defunding a police department makes absolutely zero sense to me. Zero sense to me. That's inviting anarchy. So let's just continue. Let's continue with Catherine Austin Fitts, because she addresses some of these other problems.
Well, indirectly or directly, absolutely, the Fed is behind this. You know, the central bankers got together and said, okay, we're going to begin the global reset. You know, we're calling it Go Direct. They launch a plan. BlackRock has now been hired by 3 of the central banks. They've been hired by Canada, Sweden, and the United States. The conflicts of interest are massive. But you're talking about a fundamental reengineering. Now, I'll give you my theory on what the healthcare police powers are all about. And that is, if you are going to re-engineer the global currency system, what they want to do is they don't want to go to a new currency system. They want to go to a system where 7 billion people around the planet are literally integrated into the cloud.
Okay, so she said this, and I'll let her speak, but this is incredibly important. This is incredibly important.
And can operate with an all-digital system that is the equivalent of a credit on a company store. It's a control system. And if you look at what they're talking about putting into these injections or doing with them, you know, you're basically talking about a slavery system. You're talking about integrating into people's bodies. And I always tell people, Bill Gates put an operating system on your computer that gave somebody a backdoor and made you update it constantly. And the excuse was there's a new virus. Well, they're going to play the same game with your bodies, because if you can get brain-machine interface into a human body, or, you know, a tattoo on a human body, it's part of the quantum dot tattoos, and integrate them into the Jedi and other clouds at the U.S. government, then you can cut out all the state and local middlemen. You can cut out a lot of overhead and basically have everybody, you know, on the system. And that's why I keep saying crypto is not a currency. It's the end of currencies. But you're talking about an all-digital system where they can turn your money off and on. You know what this is called. You're a Christian. It's called the mark of the beast.
Okay, so I don't get into religion. I try to look at the facts. I frankly don't take sides politically. What she's talking about here, in case you're not catching on to it, is she used the word injection, because from a health standpoint, and she'll talk about this in a minute, and I'll let her continue. From a health standpoint, a vaccine actually corrects a health problem. An injection is something that's more sinister, if you will. An injection may entail a microchip. And this is exactly what she's getting at. If you go to Google right now and you type in DARPA, D-A-R-P-A, you type in Qualcomm, and you type in 6G, what you get is microchipping in the brain that acts as a brain-to-machine interface via 6G. Let's let her talk a little bit more.
That's what they're trying to do here. They're trying to extend the life of the dollar, build a global mechanism to manage the sort of the financial system, so shift it more out of the United States, and then essentially hook everybody up into the cloud.
How do you fight this? I mean, can you decline the mark of the beast? I mean, I guess you can, because you have supposed to have a choice. Go ahead.
Well, here's the thing: what you have to do is
So this is where citizens, regardless if you're left or right leaning in your politics, this is where citizens need to be concerned about the deployment of federal police. Okay, now to protect federal monuments makes complete sense to me because Portland, for instance, Tim Wheeler, the mayor, I believe his name is, he's saying, back off, feds, we can take care of it ourselves. Well, after 50 days, he's been unable to take care of it. There's graffiti all over the federal court in downtown Portland. Of course, this is what we're getting from news. I haven't seen this in person, but it sounds like the courthouse there is under attack. And so my opinion is that the president of the federal government, which is a corporation, has every right to go in and defend and restore law and order to his courthouse. Now, it's up to the Portland PD to restore law and order in their city, and it's up to the citizens to demand it. You can only go so far, folks, before things get absurd. And defunding a police department, again, I'll reiterate, makes absolutely zero sense to me. Look, I don't believe in violence, but I do believe in law and order. And going back on what Greg Hunter is saying here, the watchdog, he's not quite following the money trail. And that's what I'm urging you to do. If you listen to this and it resonates with you, you need to be following the money trail because the American dollar seemingly is under complete attack. It's likely on its way to crashing. And what gets implemented after the dollar crashes is a global-based digital currency system that runs off of microchipping. And that is a fact. Well, that's a presumption, but what we can say is fact is Microsoft patent WO2020060606. It was awarded to Microsoft just this past February, and that is to run a digital currency. That is to run a digital currency off of human beings that are microchipped. And this is what Catherine Austin Fitts is getting to. By the way, before we get more from Catherine, if you go to my website, iantrottier.com, go to the articles tab, and look into a guy named Anthony Sutton. He taught at Stanford for 7 years, and he talks extensively about a Hegelian dialectic being applied to finances. Prescott Bush was tried as a war criminal, correct me if I'm wrong, because he was financing not only the Hitler regime, but he was also financing the Western Alliance through Brown's brother Harriman. Sutton talks about that extensively, and I was actually turned on to Sutton while I was working with Winwood Radio, as he had given a speech in Miami Beach in 1972 that he was reprimanded for in Palo Alto. Continuing with Catherine.
you have to fight vaccine mandates because what I've said, I wrote an article called The Injection Fraud, which you just mentioned. What I said is these are not vaccines. Vaccine under the law is a medicine. And if you look at what they're talking about putting into some of these things, and this is very experimental, but you have nanoparticles, nanotechnology, you have things that alter your gene. These things are very experimental, and they're talking about using them without animal trials or the appropriate kind of trial. Normal trials, it would take you 2 years. Now, they've tried for many, many years to come up with a vaccine for coronavirus. They've never been able to do it. So if you look, I think one of the reasons they want contact tracing is so that they can deal with all the death, disability, and sort of sickness that's going to come from, injecting bio waste into human bodies. One of the things that's in this is aborted fetal tissue. So you've got aborted fetal tissue, you've got heavy metals, you've got the history of these injections is very, very ugly. And it's one of the reasons 54% of the children in America have chronic disease because of all the sort of foreign matter that's been going into our veins from this stuff. So what I said in the injection fraud is this is not medicine. A surveillance tracker is not medicine. I mean, what Bill Gates is proposing to put the equivalent of a Microsoft operating system in your body that can be hooked up to their cloud. And so you can be hooked up to the AI, and all that data can make the AI very, very smart, including teaching robots how to do your job. So this is a very dystopian vision of the future. But make no mistake about it, if you could implement this vision, there are trillions of dollars to be made implementing this vision. So if you look at the new system is very much what some people call a transhumanist system. But it's not a new currency. It's not a cryptocurrency. It's not a digital currency. It's a credit system where they can cut you off centrally. If you look at the police powers, they're suggesting under the rubric and excuse of healthcare, they're talking about, you can't go to the store unless you let us inject you with these mystery agreements. You can't work unless you do. You can't do this. You can't do that. Do you know what contact tracing is? Have you?
Yeah, with smartphones. They use
No, they're talking with contact tracing, hiring tens of thousands of contact tracers who can come into your home and force you to be tested. And if they find you positive, now remember, many of these tests have 50 to 80% false positives, they can quarantine you, and they reserve the right to take people out of your home and take them to government or private camps.
So this is where you have to be concerned about the federal police, Homeland Security moving into some of these cities. You've got a catch-22 going on here, right? In that sense, because you've got unrest, you've got anarchy developing, yet this could spin into an uncontrollable situation if not handled properly. You're now inserting what she's talking about in the contact tracers. If the vaccine comes in and then you order the federal police to mandate vaccines in a population, how would you react? How would you feel about that? So there's laws being breached on both sides of the spectrum. Okay? There's laws being breached, there's rights being violated. And again, maintain your peace, maintain your calm, and follow the money. Because really, if Americans step back and want, in my view, they want sanity. And I'm using that word because I think this is not sane. But if they want sanity restored to their country, you've got to backtrack over 100 years worth of corruption. And you've got to demand, and this was big in 2008 with the subprime mortgage crisis, but you've got to redemand that Federal Reserve banking system become transparent, become exposed. It's got to be audited. Ron Paul's been talking about this for a couple decades, I believe. It's got to be audited. And you've got to show the American people that there's value behind the work that they're doing on a daily basis. That value is your precious metal, your gold and your silver. You've got the Federal Reserve and you've got the U.S. Treasury both saying within recent years that neither one of them have gold. And Nixon's far long abolished the gold standard. So where is the value, America? Where is the value in your currency? There is none. It's a fiat currency. There's no more value in a bill from a monopoly. Parker Brothers, is it? or Hasbro. I don't know who makes Monopoly, but there's more value in a bill from Monopoly game board than there is from the Federal Reserve note that you have in your pocket. And that central banking mechanism is pushing harder than it's ever pushed to completely obliterate and wipe out monetary exchange from hand to hand worldwide. Dollars, coins, to completely do away with that system and implement a digital currency. Technically, there's differences between digital and crypto currency, but there really isn't, in my opinion. So let's continue with Catherine. Then I want to get into a little bit of a Gerald Posner segment that was just sent to me.
Separately. So they're asserting the right to come into your home and take your children. So I come in, I test you, I say you're positive with tests which are totally unreliable, and almost everybody has coronavirus in their bodies, and we're asymptomatic. It's like saying we have cells, you know. So you're talking about creating police powers that are going to give you very tyrannical central controls. This is ripping up the Constitution to an exponential degree.
Where does Donald Trump fit in?
Donald Trump, as far as I can tell, is playing along. Now, it's interesting. Donald Trump resisted shutting down the economy, but then he went ahead and did it. And Donald Trump, who's resisted vaccine mandates, proceeded after sort of Bill Gates and Fauci's credibility was destroyed for very good reason on many different points. Donald Trump promoted and started a program called Operation Warp Speed. And Operation Warp Speed is being run by the former head of research from GlaxoSmithKline, who's a bioelectronics expert, and according to the Financial Times, is one of the leaders on brain-machine interface. Now, he's got Operation Warp Speed set up to coordinate with the Department of Defense, and he's arranged for the Department of Defense, I think, to buy, I think it's $600 million. It's basically 2 syringes for the whole population set up with digital coding so that they can basically, put in a database who got what vaccine, et cetera. And frankly, if you look at how that's all organized and set up, Trump has said, well, it's for people who want the vaccine. If you look at the effort to get mandates state by state by state and, basically use the health code and the pretext of a flu defined as a pandemic to radically increase central police powers, I think we're talking about the greatest experiment.
I'm stopping it there because this is not an experiment. This is design, in my opinion, and this is a design that is decades old. My presumption is that the United States has long been under fire. It is the most productive country that's ever been organized, in my opinion. It's brought a lot of good to the world. It's brought a lot of bad, but at least it has been able to bring people of all walks of life and languages together like no other country has ever done in the history of mankind, to my understanding and knowledge. But Catherine's got another 35 minutes of discussion, of talk. Please look for it on YouTube. And again, what's Google? What's YouTube? All that is basically artificial intelligence. So, in the large scheme of things, that's what is happening, folks. We are the brain and machine interface is strengthening, and little by little, in my view, we are simply becoming more integrated into robotics, machinery, artificial intelligence. Now, if you don't mind being injected and implanted with a microchip or a digital ID, which is a company funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and Microsoft. It's out of San Francisco, ID 2020. And by the way, a lot of this information is available on the Rockefeller Foundation website. Regardless of whether they mean good or mean bad, it's really up to you as an individual to decide what you feel you want in your life. Do you want a microchip to be implanted on your body to track your every mood? I know your cell phone is being tracked, but if you want this actually inserted into your body, well, you need to speak up and voice your opinion, because it's starting with the whole mask situation in debate across the country. Do you think that's a violation of your right? One argument is, well, we've got to wear clothes to go into a public setting. Yeah, that's fine, but no one's asking you to. Wear headphones to block out any hearing. No one's asking you to wear a blindfold to block your eyesight. But they are asking you to block your mouth, which will inhibit your breathing. And that's being done to somehow tell you that it's for the betterment of your neighbor and for your own health. Well, you have to decide whether that's should be your choice or government's choice. You want a big government? You want a little government? It's time for America to stand up and voice their opinion and do so in a peaceful manner. The violence is disgusting. It absolutely disgusts me. Okay, so let's get in quickly to Gerald Posner for a few moments, and then we'll wind down the discussion for this afternoon. Let me bring this up here. Okay, so Posner joined me a little over a month ago to talk about his most current book, Pharma, Greed, Lies, and the Poisoning of America. I want to direct your attention to Charlotte Iserbyt. And Charlotte was one of the early guests on the program, and she wrote the book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of Americans. This was back in the 80s, as she was fired by the Reagan administration for speaking out about the public education in America. So let's just get into this real quickly, and then we'll wind down for this Wednesday. The Sacklers, that's Sacklers. The Sacklers could get away with it. The family behind the Purdue Pharma made a fortune on the opioid epidemic. Will they ever truly face justice? Posner is the author of Pharma, Greed, Lies, and the Poisoning of America. And he's co-written this New York Times piece with Mr. Brubaker, who is a law professor. Okay, chimes. The billionaire Sacklers, who own Purdue Pharma, maker of the OxyContin painkiller that helped fuel America's opioid epidemic, are among America's richest families. You probably never heard of them. And if they have their way, the federal court handling Purdue's bankruptcy case will help them hold on to their wealth by releasing them from liability for the ravages caused by OxyContin. July 30th deadline for filing claims in Purdue's bankruptcy proceedings potentially implicate not just claims against Purdue, but also claims against the Sacklers. The Sacklers may yet again benefit from expansive powers that bankruptcy courts exercise in complex cases. So far, the bankruptcy court has granted injunctions stopping proceedings in several hundred lawsuits charging that Sackler family members directed the aggressive marketing campaign that led to millions of addicted patients and the deaths of several hundred thousands. The Sacklers offered $3 billion in hope that bankruptcy court will impose a global settlement of OxyContin litigation. Under this settlement, all claims against the Sacklers, even by families who lost loved ones to opioids, would be forever extinguished. The Sacklers would walk away with an estimated several billion of OxyContin profits after leaving unresolved a crucial question asked by victims and their families. Did the Sacklers create and coordinate fraudulent marketing that helped make their best-selling drug a deadly national scourge? With that question left unanswered, many of those injured by OxyContin would feel victimized again. In a bankruptcy filing, debts are given discharged in legal terms after debtors commit the full value of all their assets with the exception of certain types of property like a primary home to pay their creditors. This is not, however, what the Sacklers want. And indeed, the members of the family have not filed for bankruptcy themselves. What they propose instead is to be shielded from all OxyContin lawsuits, protecting their tremendous personal wealth from victims' claims against them. What's more, a full liability release would provide the Sacklers with more immunity than they could ever obtain in a personal bankruptcy filing, which would not protect them from legal action for fraud, willful or malicious personal injury, or from punitive damages. And by the way, Posner is a former Wall Street attorney. Appalling legal experts expect the court to give the Sacklers what they want. The precedent in a 1984 case in which the A.H. Robbins Company, the manufacturer of Dalkin Shield contraceptive device, filed for bankruptcy protection. Plaintiffs charged that members of the Robbins family and others had fraudulently concealed evidence of the Dalkin Shield's dangers. None of themselves filed for bankruptcy, but the court discharged all of them from liability. The releases even went as far as to prohibit injured women from suing their doctors for medical malpractice. Sounds like vaccine-injured children. Other bankruptcy courts, or parents of, have since embraced this concept of a shield from liability of those who have not filed bankruptcy. By the way, vaccine court is a legitimate and real court practice in the United States that protects pharmaceuticals from being sued. The Constitution vests only Congress with the power to enact bankruptcy laws, the essence of which is prescribing by statute how much wealth a debtor must surrender to debtors in order to obtain a discharge. But Congress has never given a green light for the courts to create a liability discharge process for those, like the Sacklers, who have not submitted all their assets to the control of bankruptcy courts by filing bankruptcy. The extraordinary practice presents serious obstacles for those injured by OxyContin. If granted, it will be nearly impossible to get a full and transparent assessment of the Sacklers' role in the opioid crisis without either the appointment of an independent examiner in the bankruptcy case or congressional investigation. Allowing the bankruptcy court to impose a global OxyContin settlement may at first appear to be an efficient way to resolve litigation that could drag on for years, but the Sacklers will benefit from the expediency at that expense of victims. At stake is whether there will ever be a fair assessment of responsibility for the America's deadly prescription drug epidemic, protection from all OxyContin liabilities for the Sacklers. However, Sackler family would be an end run around the reckoning that justice requires. You can find that article at NewYorkTimes.com. Gerald Posner, the title again, an opinion piece. The Sacklers could get away with it. We have incredibly trying times, folks, in this country. Nor did I ever see this happening. My consult is for Americans to unite. Dividing is not an effective resolution. Division will cause chaos. Where these cities are having a chaotic atmosphere regarding these looting and rioting and violent protesting, it's becoming an outrageous situation. And if a police department is defunded, who then moves in with the power? Because someone will obtain the power. Some group, some organization will obtain that power. So who will control the power if the police department loses it? Likely, they will be rogue organizations that don't have your freedom at their best interest. Again, defunding a police department means a transition of power. So where then does that power come from? And it will likely come from a place that you won't like, because they will not have you in their best interest. That's going to do it for Discussions of Truth. July 22nd. I'll be back next week with Gerald Horn. Gerald is a professor at the University of Houston, and he has a PhD from Columbia University, a JD from University of California, Berkeley, and a BA from Princeton. Folks, thanks for tuning in. Please pass the message along. Again, Catherine Austin Fitz and YouTube. And be safe. And folks, simply be awesome.